This is the Capitol Rundown.
The verdict is a disgrace.
The budget process is moving. My guess is they'll meet the deadline.
You are our best hope to counter this threat to our society.
I truly believe that our best days are ahead of us. It's not going to happen automatically. I'm running in this race to actually lead us there.
It's all straight ahead. The Capitol Rundown starts now.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Siobhan Klepfer. It has been another busy week in Michigan and in Washington. There's been some important developments in the race for president, and we'll talk to another candidate later in the show. Meanwhile, the Michigan legislature and Congress are both battling over budgets. They're making some headway in Lansing, where the House, Senate, and governor's office are all controlled by the same party. But they're at a standstill in D.C., where there's a divided government, and both sides are playing chicken over the debt ceiling and the possibility of default. What they decide and when they decide it could have major consequences for the U.S. economy. Washington correspondent Hannah Brandt explains how the negotiations are going.
The president and top congressional leaders spent about an hour meeting behind closed doors, but that discussion failed to lead to a breakthrough.
I made clear during our meeting that default is not an option.
The U.S. is quickly hurtling towards a default deadline that could happen as soon as June 1st. But after meeting at the White House, the president and congressional leaders don't seem any closer to a deal.
Everybody in this meeting reiterated the positions they were at. I didn't see any new movement.
House Republicans already passed a bill to lift the debt ceiling, but only in exchange for sweeping spending cuts. President Biden and Democrats say they need to raise the debt ceiling without conditions.
We again repeat our plea to Speaker McCarthy. Take default off the table and let's resume negotiations in the budget process.
Though they've made it clear that they have problems with Republicans' budget proposal.
He's proposed deep cuts that I believe are going to hurt American families.
And even though time is running out, President Biden says he's confident they'll find a way to avoid default.
There's a lot of politics, posturing, and gamesmanship, and it's going to continue for a while. But I am squarely focused on what matters, and we're getting to work.
In Washington, I'm Hannah Brandt.
Last week, before the meeting, this week, the Rundown had a chance to sit down with Congressman James Clyburn. The South Carolina Democrat serves as one of the minority party leaders in Congress, and when we asked him about the debt ceiling and default, he gave us an unexpected answer.
I have always been against us having a debt limit. That, to me, is a little bit sophomoric in trying to run the country. That ought to be gone by the wayside. What other country like ours has got such a thing? You got a debt limit every time you have a budget vote. And that is when that ought to be exercised. But to allow the full faith and credit of the United States of America to be exposed to political whims of people who got no idea what that really means and seem not to care whether or not that really occurs. They don't seem to look at the history. What happened to us the last time there was a threat of not doing this? What happened to the markets? What happened to people's individual interest rates on loans? Is because we had this threat. We should remove all those threats.
Well, when we come back, we're going to jump back into presidential politics. Up next, we'll talk about what happened to former President Donald Trump this week, and we'll talk to one of his competitors for the Republican nomination. That's when the Capitol Rundown continues. It was a rough week for former President Donald Trump. On Monday, a jury found him liable for sexual battery and defamation in a civil case brought by writer E. Jean Carroll. They also told Mr. Trump to give Carroll around $2 million for sexual battery and about $3 million for the defamation. The jury did not find the former president liable for rape. Both Mr. Trump and his attorney reacted after the verdict.
I have absolutely no idea who this woman is. The verdict is a disgrace, a continuation of the greatest witch hunt of all time.
He was obviously very happy that Donald Trump was not branded a rapist.
Mr. Trump did not show up for the trial, and his lawyers say they will appeal. While polls show Donald Trump is the leading candidate for the Republican Party's nomination, he's certainly not the only candidate for the commander-in-chief position, and one of his opponents from his own party campaigned in Michigan last weekend. The Rundown caught up with Vivek Ramaswamy as he stumped in southeast Michigan to make his case.
First of all, my wife grew up in Bloomfield Hills, not that far from here. I grew up in Ohio. I think that it just feels familiar, to be honest. I mean, we go cross-section of where I live in Columbus, 50 miles in a given direction, go 50-mile radius of where we are today. It's a cross-section of the country. And first of all, I think that fact, you don't have to, it tells us that we're American, where you don't have to travel the whole country to know what the country's about. I also think it's important because it's a state that mostly shares those pro-American values, and yet temporarily right now has become a state that has elected leaders, for example, a governor at the state level, that doesn't embody what most of the state represents. So to me, I think it's a good example of the disconnect that we have in America with where most of the voters are versus the leadership in power. I think most of that is actually failures in the Republican Party. And so I'm not some partisan professional politician. I'm coming in here to fix that, both in Michigan and across the country. And so I expect we'll be spending a lot more time here. I think we have a choice. Do we actually want a national revival, or do we want a national divorce? Do we want grievance, or do we want first principles? The bet I'm making is that we want a revival, not a divorce. That we want principles, not grievance. That we want a moral foundation, not just vengeance. If I'm right about that, there are no hurdles. We're going the distance to win the nomination and then winning in a landslide election. But that's not for me to decide. That's for the people of this country to look themselves in the mirror. All of us look ourselves in the mirror and ask ourselves who we really are. That's who I think we are. That's why I'm in this race, and that's why I think we're going to win it in a landslide. I'm the first millennial ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. I've got fresh legs. I'm the outsider in this race. I'm not yet jaded and cynical and tired and defeated. I might be 8 years from now, who knows? I think Donald Trump today isn't the same Donald Trump as 8 years ago. I won't be the same person 8 years from now as I am today, but I've got fresh legs. I truly believe that our best days are ahead of us. It's not going to happen automatically. I'm running in this race to actually lead us there. It's also why I'm going to be coming back to places like Michigan to actually start conversations like the ones that we just had. That's what gives me energy, is a room full of people like this. Driving 3 hours to be part of this event, that's what gives me inspiration and lifts me up. I think it's going to lift us up all the way to the White House.
Well, coming up next, we will bring you more from our conversation with Vivek Ramaswamy. And then, even though they just took office, we'll talk about how the race for the Michigan House and Senate is looking. That and much more coming up. Welcome back. We continue our conversation with Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. He might not have the name recognition of Donald Trump, but that didn't stop him from spelling out the differences between them.
I think we're going to require a true outsider to get the job done of dismantling the administrative state, of actually gutting the deep state, of declaring independence from China, unleashing the economy rather than arguing over specifics of tax increases or Social Security cuts. That's going to take an outsider. You only get to be an outsider once, by the way. I'm the outsider in this race. And I think I'm taking the America First agenda far further than Donald Trump did. I'm taking on issues he didn't touch. Race-based affirmative action, abandoning the climate cult, using the military to actually secure the border, not just talking about building some wall, shutting down government agencies like the Department of Education, like just putting Betsy DeVos or whoever on top. I'm going far further, but I'm doing it on first principles and moral authority, not just vengeance and grievance. It's not about me, it's not about Trump, it is about the people of this country. And that's just a difference in the way that I lead. It's not being done by me, it's not being done by Trump, it's being done through us. Right? A belief in a higher power, that we're not just going through some aimless passage of time in this geographic space that we call a country as a bunch of two-legged higher mammals with some different shades of melanin celebrating our diversity, doing what our iPhones told us to do on a given day. That's not this country. It's the way we act sometimes. The thing that separates us from animals, from beasts, is that we can believe in something bigger than ourselves, including this country. And I believe that if we revive that conviction, that our best days are still ahead of us. It's not going to be someone coming from on high, from the White House, to just save us, me or Donald Trump. If we're going to be saved, we're going to save ourselves. That's the kind of going to call it what it is. That's the kind of revolution, cultural revival that I'm leading in this country. And I have full confidence that if we're able to start talking openly, if we're able to be courageous, if we're able to pass that on to the next generation, and at the age of 37, that's my responsibility to deliver, then yes, I do believe that our best days are still yet ahead of us. And anybody who disagrees with me on that, I'd be happy to debate and come out on the winning side of it. Maybe we'll do that in the Republican debate stage.
Up next on the Rundown, we're going to stay on the topic of Campaign 24, but we're going to talk about how things are shaping up in Michigan as Republicans seek to win back the House. So stay tuned. The Capitol Rundown. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The Michigan House Democrats are in charge of their side of the Capitol for the first time in some 40 years, and they put out a press release the other week about how well they're doing on the fundraising end as they seek to stay in the majority in 2024. So we decided to take a closer look at the numbers. Democrats trumpeted the fact that they raised more than $1 million, a record amount for them in the first quarter of 2023. And they did. Records show they raked in $1.3 million and have almost all of it ready to spend. But as it turns out, the House Republicans raised almost as much. They finished just $50,000 short, but they have slightly more money on hand. Over in the Senate, Republicans are in the lead. They raised $1.4 million, although they had to pay back some loans, so they've got less than half of that in their bank account. On the other side of the aisle, Democrats raised just over $1 million, almost all of which went to pay back loans. They've got just $68,000 on hand. Although we should note the battle for the Michigan Senate won't happen until 2026. It is time now to check in on Michigan politics with our Capitol correspondent Tim Skubic. Jorma Duran spoke with him about the budget battle shaping up in Lansing, but they started with the possibility of a new political party in the Great Lakes state.
It's time to get updated politically here in the state of Michigan, and nobody better than this guy right here, Tim Skubic, to give us the lowdown. Tim, I heard rumors that there's this movement to potentially create a new party. Please tell me more about this.
There's a guy by the name of Jeff Timmer. He's a disgruntled former Republican, sort of turned Democrat, who, along with some other names that I'm going to mention in a second that you will recognize, want to put together what they're calling the Common Sense Party as an alternative to the R's and the D's for people in those parties that are disgruntled with what their parties are doing, whomever they might be. And of course, the question out there in TV land is, so what? What difference does it make? Well, the so what could be important. Traditionally, Jorma, third-party candidates and third parties don't do very well. They get about 2 to 3% of the vote, but in some cases, third-party candidates don't win elections, but they decide the elections by siphoning off votes from those candidates who were going to be elected if the third party was not on the ballot. So they can have an impact on the process. The question is, what impact will this Common Sense Party have? That's yet to be determined, but it's out there. They're going to gather the signatures, and my guess is you're going to have another party to look at as you decide in the voting booth as to whom you want to run for office and be elected to office.
Well, Tim, let's talk about this. The Michigan House passes the state budget this week. What are some of the highlights?
The handout in this case is a bunch of cash. About $21 billion with a B, $21 billion in state aid going to schools, $9,700 per pupil, a universal lunch and breakfast program for all students, a whole bunch of stuff in here vis-a-vis the school aid bill. And the Republicans are complaining, bitterly complaining. They've offered over hundreds of amendments to change these budget bills, and 0 of them have passed. That's why basically the Republicans are saying, okay, Democrats, go ahead and pass your budget bills. But you know what? You can't give them immediate effect. The schools won't get the money right away because we, the Republicans, are going to withhold our votes for immediate effect to give the bills right now, send the money out. So there's going to have to be some delicate negotiations between the R's and D's to get the R's on board and their price tag. They want some stuff in the budget that the R's want, not just what the D's want. So the budget process is moving. My guess is they'll meet the deadline, but it could be ugly getting there.
Tim Jorma, thank you. When we come back, it's time to celebrate. Coming up, we'll take you to the Michigan State University graduation ceremonies. We'll tell you what advice Dr. Anthony Fauci had for the Spartans. We'll be right back. Welcome back. It's graduation season, and that means some high-profile visits to college campuses across the state to give some graduation speeches. At Michigan State University, that included Dr. Anthony Fauci, who helped lead the country through the COVID crisis. His advice to Spartans was to stick to the evidence, and he's not just talking about science.
Normalization and acceptance of untruths and outright egregious lying threatens many aspects of our lives that you will be involved with. Education, business, the law, in a way that should deeply concern all of us. I do not believe that I am being hyperbolic when I say that the normalization and casual acceptance of untruths without our fiercely pushing back on this phenomenon can gradually lead to the erosion of the foundation of our democracy. We need only to look at January 6, 2021. And so, I plead with you as you leave this outstanding institution. You are our best hope to counter this threat to our society. Do not hesitate to push back these destructive forces with all the strength that you can muster. And do your best to explain what is known, what is not known, and to help people understand and follow the best available evidence.
Congratulations to all of this year's graduates. And if you would like to give or get more political news from Michigan and Washington as a graduation present, we've got just the thing for you. You can sign up for our Capitol Rundown newsletter. It's just one email each week, and you can get it by pointing your cell phone camera at the screen right now. That will take you to the sign-up page, or you can head to WLNS.com/newsletter. And that's our show for this week. Thanks for watching the Capitol Rundown.